Sarah Mitchell had known hunger like an old friend. At 16, she carried the weight of the world in her tired green eyes, and the responsibility of 3 younger children on her narrow shoulders. The orphanage in Pine Ridge had closed 6 months ago, leaving Sarah and the others to fend for themselves in the harsh wilderness of Montana Territory. The year was 1889, and winter was approaching fast. Sarah had managed to find an abandoned cabin deep in the forest, miles away from the nearest settlement. It wasn't much. The roof leaked, the windows were cracked, and the walls let in more cold air than they kept out. But it was shelter. She had learned to hunt small game with a makeshift bow, gather edible roots and berries, and keep a fire burning through the night. Tommy was only 8, with sandy hair that stuck up in all directions and a smile that could light up the darkest days. Mary was 10, quiet and thoughtful, always helping Sarah without being asked. Little Emma, just 6 years old, still cried for her mother sometimes, not understanding why she would never come back. Sarah had become their mother, their protector, their everything. Every morning Sarah would wake before dawn to check their snares and gather firewood. The forest was beautiful but dangerous, filled with wolves, bears, and the ever-present threat of getting lost in its endless maze of trees. She had heard stories about the native tribes in the area, some friendly, others not so welcoming to outsiders. The adults back in town had always spoken of them with fear and suspicion, but Sarah had never encountered any herself. On this particular morning, the air was crisp with the promise of the first frost. Sarah had left the children sleeping and ventured deeper into the woods than usual. Their food supplies were running dangerously low, and she had noticed fresh deer tracks the day before. If she could catch even a small deer, it would mean meat for weeks. She moved quietly through the underbrush, her bare feet silent on the fallen leaves. The bow in her hands was crude but effective. She had practiced for hours until she could hit a rabbit at 20 paces. Her stomach growled, reminding her that she had given most of her portion to the children the night before. As she crept through a thick grove of pine trees, Sarah heard something that made her freeze. It was crying, not the cry of an animal, but distinctly human. A child was sobbing somewhere nearby, the sound echoing through the trees like a wounded bird's call. Sarah's first instinct was to run. Strangers in the wilderness usually meant trouble, and she had 3 children depending on her to stay safe. But the crying continued, desperate and heartbroken, and Sarah found herself moving toward the sound despite her fears. She pushed through a tangle of berry bushes and found herself in a small clearing. There, sitting beside a fallen log, was a Native American boy who couldn't have been more than 7 years old. His dark hair was tangled with leaves and twigs, his clothes were torn, and blood trickled from several scratches on his arms and face. The boy looked up at Sarah with wide, frightened eyes. He said something in a language she didn't understand, his voice shaking with exhaustion and fear. Sarah could see that he was lost and hurt, probably separated from his family for quite some time. She approached slowly, her hands visible and empty except for the bow. The boy backed away, pressing himself against the log, but he was too weak to run. Sarah could see that his lips were cracked from thirst and his small frame was thin from hunger. "It's okay," Sarah said softly, though she knew he probably couldn't understand her words. "I won't hurt you." She set down her bow and pulled out her water flask, offering it to the boy. He stared at her for a long moment, then reached out with trembling hands to take the water. He drank greedily, water spilling down his chin. Sarah watched him drink and felt her heart break a little more. This child was lost and alone, just like she and the others had been. She knew what it felt like to be hungry, scared, and without anyone to turn to. Despite the danger it might bring to her own small family, she couldn't just leave him here to die. When the boy finished drinking, Sarah gestured for him to follow her. He hesitated, looking around the clearing as if hoping his family might suddenly appear. But eventually he stood on unsteady legs and began to walk with her through the forest. The journey back to the cabin took twice as long as usual. The boy was weak and stumbled frequently, and Sarah had to help him over fallen logs and through thick patches of undergrowth. She kept watch for any signs of danger, knowing that his tribe might be searching for him and that they might not appreciate. A white girl taking one of their children. As they walked, Sarah tried to communicate with gestures and simple words. She pointed to herself and said Sarah, then pointed to him with a questioning look. The boy seemed to understand and touched his chest, saying something that sounded like Ayanna. Sarah repeated the name, and the boy nodded, managing a small smile despite his exhaustion. When they finally reached the cabin, the other children were awake and worried about Sarah's long absence. Tommy ran to greet her, then stopped short when he saw Ayanna. Mary and Emma peeked out from behind him, their eyes wide with curiosity and uncertainty. "This is Ayanna," Sarah said simply. "He's lost and hurt, and he's going to stay with us until we can find his family." Tommy, always the brave one, stepped forward and waved at Ayanna. The native boy waved back shyly, and some of the tension in the air began to fade. Sarah helped Ayanna inside and gave him more water and some of their precious dried berries. She cleaned his wounds with strips torn from her own dress and made him a bed near the fire. The boy ate slowly, his eyes never leaving Sarah's face, as if he couldn't quite believe that strangers had shown him such kindness. As night fell, the 5 children settled around the small fire. Sarah told stories to help everyone relax, making up tales about brave children and magical forests. Ayanna didn't understand the words, but he seemed to enjoy the sound of her voice and the warmth of being surrounded by other children. Before they went to sleep, Sarah stepped outside to look at the stars and think about what she had done. Taking in another mouth to feed when they barely had enough for themselves was risky. And if Ayanna's tribe was unfriendly to whites, she might have put all of them in danger. But as she looked back through the window at the boy sleeping peacefully by the fire, she knew she had made the right choice. Sometimes doing what was right meant taking risks. Sometimes being human meant helping others, even when you could barely help yourself. Sarah didn't know it yet, but this single act of kindness would change all of their lives forever. 3 days had passed since Sarah found Ayanna, and the boy was growing stronger with each meal and each night of peaceful sleep. His wounds were healing well, and the fear in his dark eyes was slowly being replaced by curiosity and trust. He had begun to help around the cabin, gathering firewood and helping Sarah tend to the fire. Communication between them was still difficult, but they were learning. Ayanna would point to objects and say their names in his language, while Sarah would repeat the English words. The other children joined in these informal lessons, and soon their small cabin was filled with laughter as they struggled to pronounce each other's words. Tommy had taken a special liking to Ayanna, following him around and trying to teach him games with sticks and stones. Mary showed him how to braid grass into small ropes, and little Emma shared her precious collection of colorful pebbles with their new friend. It was as if the boy had always been part of their makeshift family. But Sarah knew this happiness couldn't last forever. Somewhere out there, Ayanna's real family was probably searching for him, sick with worry and fear. She had seen the love in the boy's eyes when he looked at the sky and spoke words she didn't understand. He was talking to his family, wherever they were. On the 4th morning, Sarah made a decision. She would try to find Ayanna's tribe and return him to his people. It was the right thing to do, even though it meant venturing into unknown territory and possibly dangerous situations. She explained her plan to the other children as best she could. Tommy wanted to come with her, but Sarah insisted he stay to protect Mary and Emma. She would take Ayanna and search for signs of his tribe, campfires, trails, or other clues that might lead them home. Ayanna seemed to understand what Sarah was planning. He became excited, speaking rapidly in his own language and gesturing toward the mountains in the distance. He kept saying one word over and over, Liwanu, which Sarah guessed might be his father's name or the name of his tribe. They set out just after sunrise, carrying water and the last of their dried meat. Sarah had her bow, and she had taught Ayanna to recognize edible plants and berries in case they got separated. The boy walked with new energy, often running ahead and then coming back to make sure Sarah was following. The terrain grew more difficult as they moved away from their familiar forest. They climbed rocky hills, crossed rushing streams, and navigated through thick patches of thorny bushes. Ayana seemed to know where he was going, occasionally stopping to examine bent twigs or disturbed earth that meant nothing to Sarah, but apparently told him a story. By midday, they had traveled farther from the cabin than Sarah had ever been. The landscape was wilder here, with towering pine trees and steep cliffs that seemed to touch the sky. Sarah began to worry about finding their way back, but Ayana showed no signs of doubt or fear. As they rested beside a small stream, sharing their water and the last of the meat, Sarah heard something that made her blood run cold. It was the sound of horses approaching, many horses moving fast through the forest. She grabbed Ayana and pulled him behind a large boulder, pressing a finger to her lips to signal for quiet. The boy's eyes went wide, but he nodded and crouched, down beside her. Through a gap in the rocks, Sarah could see a group of riders approaching. They were Native American warriors, painted for war and carrying weapons. Their faces were grim and determined, and they moved with the practiced efficiency of people who had been searching for something important. Sarah's heart pounded as she realized this must be Ayana's tribe looking for him. But they looked angry and dangerous, and she worried about what they might do to her if they found a white girl with their missing child. Ayana had seen the riders too, and his face lit up with joy. He started to stand, clearly wanting to run to them, but Sarah held him back. She didn't know how to explain that she was afraid, that these warriors might see her as an enemy rather than someone who had helped their child. The riders passed by their hiding spot, but one of them, a tall man with silver hair and stern features, stopped his horse and looked directly at the boulder where they were hidden. Sarah held her breath, certain they had been discovered. The man said something in their language, and another rider responded. They seemed to be debating something. Then the silver-haired man dismounted and began walking toward their hiding place. Sarah made a quick decision. She stood up slowly, her hands raised to show she wasn't armed, and gently pushed Ayana forward. The boy immediately began running toward the man, calling out, "Liwanu! Liwanu!" with tears of joy streaming down his face. The man, who Sarah realized must be Ayana's father, caught the boy in his arms and held him tightly. The other warriors had dismounted and were gathering around, their stern faces softening with relief and happiness at seeing their lost child safe. But when Liwanu looked at Sarah, his expression hardened again. He spoke sharply to her in his own language, his meaning clear even though she couldn't understand the words. He wanted to know who she was and what she had been doing with his son. Ayana began talking rapidly, gesturing toward Sarah, and then toward the direction of the cabin. He seemed to be explaining how she had found him and taken care of him. The boy grabbed Sarah's hand and pulled her toward his father, clearly trying to show that she was a friend. Liwanu listened to his son's story, his dark eyes never leaving Sarah's face. She stood as straight as she could, trying not to show her fear. She had done nothing wrong. She had saved this man's child and cared for him when he was lost and hurt. Surely that would count for something. When Ayana finished talking, there was a long silence. The other warriors watched their leader, waiting to see what he would decide. Sarah could feel the tension in the air like the moment before a thunderstorm. Finally, Liwanu spoke. His English was broken but understandable. "My son says you found him, fed him, cared for his wounds." Sarah nodded. "He was lost and hurt. I couldn't just leave him." "Many of your people would have," Liwanu said, his voice carrying years of bitter experience. "Why did you help?" Sarah thought about the question. Why had she helped? It would have been easier and safer to walk away. "Because he needed help," she said simply. "Because he's just a child, and children shouldn't suffer alone." Liwanu studied her face for a long moment. Then he spoke to the other warriors in their language. Sarah caught what sounded like an argument, with some of the men gesturing angrily in her direction. But Liwanu held up his hand for silence, and the argument stopped. He turned back to Sarah. "You are very young to be alone in the wilderness." "I'm not alone," Sarah said. "I have 3 other children with me. We take care of each other." This seemed to surprise Liwanu. He asked Ayana something, and the boy nodded eagerly, apparently confirming Sarah's story. "Where are these other children?" Liwanu asked. Sarah hesitated. She didn't want to reveal the location of their cabin, but she also didn't want to lie to Ayana's father. "They're safe," she said finally. Liwanu seemed to understand her caution. He spoke to his son again, and Ayana ran to Sarah and hugged her tightly around the waist. When he stepped back, he had tears in his eyes. "He wants to go home," Liwanu said. "But he also wants you to be safe. He says you are his sister now." The words hit Sarah harder than she had expected. In just 4 days, this lost little boy had become part of her heart, and now she had to let him go. "Tell him I'll never forget him," Sarah said, kneeling down to hug Ayana one more time. "Tell him to be brave and kind, always." Liwanu translated her words, and Ayana nodded solemnly. Then he ran back to his father, ready to go home but looking back at Sarah with eyes full of love and gratitude. As the warriors prepared to leave, Liwanu approached Sarah one more time. "You showed great kindness to my son," he said. "This will not be forgotten." Then they were gone, disappearing into the forest as quickly as they had appeared, leaving Sarah alone with the echoing memory of Ayana's laughter and the knowledge that she had done the right thing, even though it broke her heart to say goodbye. 2 weeks had passed since Sarah said goodbye to Ayana, and the cabin felt strangely empty without his laughter and curious questions. Tommy kept looking toward the door, as if expecting the native boy to walk back in at any moment. Mary had saved a small pile of the colorful leaves that Ayana had loved to collect. Even little Emma would sometimes set out an extra portion of food before remembering that their friend was no longer with them. Sarah tried to keep everyone busy and hopeful, but the approaching winter made survival increasingly difficult. The temperature dropped each night, and frost now covered the ground every morning. Their food stores were nearly empty despite her daily hunting trips, and Sarah knew that 4 people couldn't survive the harsh Montana winter in their makeshift shelter. She had been considering the unthinkable, returning to town and hoping someone would take them in, even if it meant being separated. The orphanage was gone, but perhaps individual families might be willing to take 1 child each. The thought of breaking up their little family made Sarah feel sick, but watching the children grow thinner each day was worse. On a gray morning, when the first snow was beginning to fall, Sarah was outside splitting wood when she heard horses approaching. Her blood ran cold, remembering the last time riders had appeared in the forest. She quickly called for the children to get inside the cabin and grabbed her bow. But as the riders emerged from the trees, Sarah's fear turned to amazement. It was Liwanu leading a group of his people, and riding beside him on a small pony was Ayana. The boy's face lit up with joy when he saw Sarah, and he waved enthusiastically from his mount. The group stopped in front of the cabin, and Liwanu dismounted, while the others remained on their horses. Ayana jumped down from his pony and ran to Sarah, hugging her tightly around the waist just as he had done when they said goodbye. "Sister Sarah," he said in careful English, clearly having practiced the words. "I came back." Sarah knelt down to hug him properly, tears flowing down her cheeks. "Ayana, I missed you so much, but why are you here?" Before the boy could answer, Liwanu approached them. His expression was serious but not unfriendly, and Sarah could see something like respect in his dark eyes. "My son spoke of you every day," Liwanu said in his careful English. He told the elders about the white girl who saved him, who shared her food when she had little, who treated him as family. Sarah stood up, still holding Ayana's hand. "He was easy to love," she said simply. "The elders were curious about this girl," Liwanu continued. "They sent scouts to watch your camp from a distance. They saw how you care for the other children, how you go hungry so they can eat, how you protect them." Sarah felt a flush of embarrassment. She hadn't known they were being watched, and she wondered what else the scouts had observed. "Winter comes early this year," Liwanu said, looking at their crude shelter and the thin wisps of smoke rising from their small fire. "You cannot survive here with these children." Sarah's heart sank. She had hoped they weren't being judged too harshly, but apparently their desperate situation was obvious to experienced eyes. The elders have made a decision, Liwanu continued. They invite you and the children to spend the winter with our tribe. You saved one of our children. Now we offer to save yours. Sarah stared at him in shock. She had expected many things, but not this generous offer from people who had every reason to distrust whites. I don't understand, Sarah said. Your people don't know us, why would you? My son told us something else, Liwanu interrupted. When the other children were hungry, you gave them your food. When they were cold, you gave them your blanket. When they were afraid, you told them stories to make them brave. This is how family behaves. Ayana tugged on Sarah's hand and began speaking excitedly in his own language. Liwanu listened, then translated. He says you are the best sister in the world, and if we don't bring you home with us, he will run away and come live here instead. Sarah laughed despite her emotional state. That sounded exactly like something the determined little boy would do. But we're not your people, Sarah said. We don't speak your language. We don't know your customs. What if we can't fit in? Ayana did not speak English when you found him, Liwanu replied. But you made him part of your family anyway. We can do the same. At that moment, Tommy peeked out from behind the cabin door, having heard the familiar voices. When he saw Ayana, he let out a whoop of joy and came running, followed by Mary and Emma. The reunion was loud and happy, with all the children talking at once and trying to hug Ayana simultaneously. Watching them, Sarah felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the weak sun overhead. These children had missed their friend just as much as she had, and seeing them together again felt like coming home. There is something else, Liwanu said quietly while the children were distracted. The tribal council has heard stories of your kindness, but they wanted to see for themselves the character of the white girl who helped our child. They sent me to test you. Sarah looked at him with confusion. Test me how? I was told to offer to take only you, to leave the other children here, and bring just you to safety for the winter. Liwanu's eyes were serious. If you had accepted, if you had been willing to save yourself and abandon them, we would have known what kind of person you really are. Sarah felt a flash of anger. I would never leave them. Never. Yes, Liwanu said with approval. That is what Ayana told the council you would say. That is why we brought extra horses, one for each child. Sarah looked at the group of riders and realized there were indeed additional horses, including several gentle-looking mares that would be suitable for children. They had come prepared to take her entire makeshift family. The offer is real, Liwanu continued. You and the children can come to our winter camp. You will be given shelter, food, and protection. In return, you can help care for all the children in the tribe. We have heard you are good with the young ones. Sarah thought about the offer. It seemed too good to be true. But looking at Ayana's hopeful face and remembering the kindness in his eyes when she first found him, she began to believe it was genuine. What about after winter, she asked. What happens to us in the spring? That depends on you, Liwanu said. If you wish to stay with the tribe, there will be a place for you. If you wish to return to the white settlements, we will help you get there safely. The choice will be yours. Sarah looked at the other children, who had been listening to the conversation with growing excitement. Tommy was practically bouncing with eagerness, and even shy Mary looked hopeful. Can we have a few minutes to talk about it? Sarah asked. Liwanu nodded and walked back toward his horse, giving them privacy. But before Sarah could even begin discussing the offer, little Emma tugged on her skirt. Sarah, the 6-year-old said in her small voice, can we go be with Ayana's family? I'm really cold at night and I'm hungry all the time. Tommy nodded eagerly. And they have horses. Did you see those horses, Sarah? Maybe they'll teach us to ride. Even practical Mary seemed convinced. They seem kind, she said quietly. And Ayana loves them. If they're good enough for him, maybe they're good enough for us. Sarah realized that the decision had already been made. These children deserved a chance at warmth, food, and safety. If Liwanu's tribe was offering those things, she would be foolish to refuse out of pride or fear. She walked back to Liwanu, who was patiently waiting beside his horse. We accept your offer, she said formally, and we're grateful for your kindness, Liwanu. smiled, the first real smile she had seen from the serious man. Then let us gather your belongings and go home. As they packed their few possessions, Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. She was about to enter a completely different world, with different customs, different language, and different ways of life. But watching Ayanna help Tommy onto one of the gentle mares, she knew they were making the right choice. Sometimes the best families were the ones you chose, not the ones you were born into. And sometimes home was wherever people loved and cared for each other, regardless of the color of their skin or the language they spoke. The ride to the tribal village was unlike anything Sarah had ever experienced. The horses moved through the forest with sure steps, following paths that were invisible to her untrained eyes, but clearly familiar to their riders. Ayanna rode beside her, chattering excitedly in a mixture of English and his native language, pointing out landmarks and explaining things she couldn't understand. Tommy and Mary rode together on a gentle brown mare, both of them wide-eyed with wonder at their first horseback experience. Little Emma rode with one of the tribal women, a kind-faced lady with graying braids who spoke softly to the child in English and made her laugh with silly faces. As they traveled deeper into the mountains, the landscape became more dramatic. Tall cliffs rose on either side of narrow valleys, and waterfalls cascaded down rocky faces to feed clear streams below. Sarah had never imagined such beauty existed in the world, and she began to understand why Ayanna's people chose to make their home in this magnificent wilderness. Just before sunset, they crested a hill, and Sarah saw the village spread out in the valley below. It was nothing like the towns she knew with their straight streets and wooden buildings. Instead, dozens of teepees were arranged in careful circles, their buffalo hide covers glowing warm and golden in the evening light. Smoke rose from cooking fires, and she could hear the sounds of children playing, and adults calling to each other in their musical language. As their group descended into the valley, people began to emerge from their teepees to watch the newcomers arrive. Sarah felt nervous under their curious gazes, suddenly very aware that she and the other orphans looked strange and out of place. Their worn clothes and pale skin marked them clearly as outsiders. But as they rode into the center of the village, Sarah was surprised to hear friendly greetings called out to them. Ayanna waved enthusiastically at everyone they passed, clearly popular among his people. Several children ran alongside their horses, laughing and reaching up to touch the newcomers' hands. They stopped in front of the largest teepee, which was decorated with painted symbols and beautiful beadwork. An elderly woman emerged from the entrance, her long silver hair braided with colored ribbons and her dress adorned with intricate embroidery. Despite her age, she moved with dignity and strength, and Sarah could see wisdom in her dark eyes. Liwanu dismounted and spoke to the woman in their language, gesturing toward Sarah and the children. The woman listened carefully, then approached Sarah's horse and looked up at her with keen interest. "I am Nokomis," the woman said in accented but clear English. "It means grandmother. I am mother to Liwanu, grandmother to Ayanna, and now I will be grandmother to you as well." Sarah climbed down from her horse and stood uncertainly before this imposing woman. "I'm Sarah Mitchell. These are Tommy, Mary, and Emma. We're grateful for your hospitality." Nokomis studied Sarah's face for a long moment, then reached out and gently touched her cheek. "You are very young to carry such responsibility," she said, kindly. "But Ayanna has told us how brave and caring you are. Come, children. You must be hungry and tired." The elderly woman led them toward a large teepee that had been prepared for their arrival. Inside, Sarah was amazed by the warmth and comfort. Buffalo robes covered the ground, and a small fire crackled in the center, sending smoke up through an opening at the top. The walls were decorated with painted designs and hung with bags and tools she didn't recognize. "This will be your home for the winter," Nokomis said. "The teepee belongs to my sister, who has gone to visit her daughter's family for the season. She was happy to let you use it." As they settled into their new home, tribal women began arriving with food: bowls of stew, cornbread, dried berries, and other dishes Sarah had never tasted before. The flavors were different from anything she knew, but they were delicious and filling. For the first time in months, all 4 children went to bed with full stomachs. The next morning, Sarah woke to the sound of camp stirring to life. Through the teepee entrance, she could see people going about their daily activities. Women tending fires and preparing food, men caring for horses and repairing equipment, children playing games in the open spaces between the dwellings. Ayana appeared at their teepee entrance, grinning broadly. "Come, Sister Sarah. Grandmother Nokomis wants to teach you our ways." The next few weeks passed in a blur of new experiences and learning. Sarah discovered that life in the tribal community was organized very differently from anything she had known. Everyone had roles and responsibilities, but they all worked together for the good of the whole group. The women taught Sarah how to prepare traditional foods, how to work with buffalo hide and elk skin, and how to use plants from the forest. For medicine and healing, she learned to make moccasins, to braid grass into ropes, and to identify which roots and berries were safe to eat. The children adapted even more quickly than Sarah had expected. Tommy learned to help with the horses and became fascinated with the bows and arrows used by the tribal boys. Mary discovered a talent for beadwork and spent hours with the women, carefully creating beautiful patterns with tiny colored beads. Emma was universally adored by everyone in the tribe and could often be found playing with a group of children, all of them chattering in a mixture of English and the tribal language. But it wasn't always easy. The language barrier meant frequent misunderstandings, and Sarah sometimes felt frustrated when she couldn't express herself clearly. Some of the customs seemed strange to her, and she worried constantly about making mistakes that might offend her hosts. One day, while Sarah was struggling to help with the preparation of a buffalo hide, Nokomis sat down beside her. The elderly woman watched Sarah's clumsy attempts at scraping the hide clean, then gently took the tool from her hands. "You try too hard," Nokomis said with a small smile. "You want to learn everything at once, to become one of us immediately. But learning takes time." "I'm afraid I'll never fit in," Sarah admitted. "Everything is so different here. What if I make a mistake? What if people decide they don't want us here after all?" Nokomis was quiet for a moment, her weathered hands working expertly on the hide. "Tell me," she said finally, "when you found my grandson lost in the forest, did you know how to speak his language?" "No," Sarah said. "Did you know our customs, our ways of caring for children?" "No." "But you cared for him anyway. You fed him, you healed his wounds, you made him part of your family. How did you know what to do?" Sarah thought about the question. I did what felt right, what I would want someone to do for me if I were lost and scared." "Exactly," Nokomis said with satisfaction. "You listen to your heart, not your head. The heart knows what is right, even when the mind is confused by differences." Over the following days, Sarah began to relax and trust her instincts more. When she made mistakes with the language or customs, people smiled and gently corrected her instead of being offended. When she didn't understand something, they patiently explained it again and again until she grasped the concept. She began to realize that the tribal community operated on principles of mutual support and respect that weren't so different from how she had tried to care for the orphan children. Everyone looked out for everyone else, especially the vulnerable ones like children and elders. Resources were shared freely, and no one went hungry while others had plenty. The children were thriving in this environment. Tommy had grown stronger and more confident, learning skills from the tribal boys that made him feel capable and important. Mary had blossomed under the patient teaching of the women, and her beautiful beadwork was beginning to rival that of girls who had been practicing for years. Emma had learned enough of the tribal language to chatter with her new friends, and her laughter could be heard throughout the village. But perhaps the most dramatic change was in Sarah herself. For years, she had carried the weight of responsibility for the other children on her shoulders alone. Now, for the first time, she was part of a community where that responsibility was shared. If Tommy got into mischief, one of the tribal men would gently guide him back to appropriate behavior. If Mary needed comfort, any of the women would offer a kind word or a hug. If Emma was hungry or tired, there were dozens of adults ready to care for her. Sarah began to remember what it felt like to be a young person instead of a substitute mother. She could laugh more, learn new things without worrying constantly about survival, and even make mistakes without catastrophic consequences. One evening, as she sat by the fire with Ayana and the other children, listening to Nokomis tell traditional stories, Sarah realized something important. She had spent so much time trying to become like her new tribal family that she had almost forgotten the gifts she brought to them. Her experience caring for the orphaned children had taught her patience, resourcefulness, and compassion. Her different background gave her fresh perspectives on old problems. Her willingness to help others, regardless of their differences, was something the tribe valued and respected. She wasn't just learning from her new community, she was contributing to it as well. And that realization filled her with a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire burning before them. Winter had settled deep into the mountains, bringing heavy snows and bitter cold that made Sarah grateful every day for the warmth of their teepee and the generous hospitality of the tribe. 3 months had passed since their arrival, and the children had adapted so well to tribal life that sometimes Sarah had to remind herself they hadn't been born here. The tribal community had embraced them completely. Tommy could now ride bareback and was learning to hunt with a bow. Mary's beadwork had become so skilled that the tribal women often asked her to help with important ceremonial pieces. Emma spoke the tribal language almost as well as English, and had adopted several elderly members of the tribe as additional grandparents who spoiled her with stories and treats. Sarah herself had found her place as a teacher and caregiver for the tribe's children. Her experience with the orphans had prepared her well for managing groups of energetic young people, and the tribal parents appreciated her patient approach to discipline and her creative storytelling abilities. But their peaceful winter life was about to be disrupted in a way none of them could have anticipated. It began with the arrival of scouts who had been watching the mountain passes. They rode into camp one gray morning, their horses' breath steaming in the cold air, their faces grim with serious news. Sarah watched from her position near the children's play area as the scouts reported to the tribal council, their urgent voices carrying across the camp even though she couldn't understand their words. Lewanu emerged from the council meeting looking troubled. He found Sarah helping some of the younger children build snow figures and asked her to walk with him away from the group. "The scouts bring word of danger," he said quietly. "There is a group of white soldiers camped 2 days' ride from here. They are asking questions about our tribe, about whether we are harboring any white captives." Sarah's blood ran cold. "Captives? But we're not captives. We're here because you invited us." "You and I know this," Lewanu said grimly. "But the soldiers may not see it that way. Some whites believe that any of their people living with tribes must have been taken by force." "What does this mean for us?" Sarah asked, though she was afraid she already knew the answer. "The council is divided," Lewanu admitted. "Some believe you should leave immediately, before the soldiers find you here. They fear that your presence puts the entire tribe at risk." Sarah felt sick to her stomach. After months of feeling like they had finally found a home, the possibility of being forced to leave was devastating. "And what do you think?" "I think," Lewanu said carefully, "that running from the soldiers will only make us look guilty of something. If they find evidence that you were here but are now gone, they will assume we harmed you and gave pursuit. So what's the alternative?" Some of the elders have suggested a different approach. They believe we should prepare to prove to the soldiers that you are here willingly, that you have been treated as honored guests rather than prisoners. That evening, the tribal council called Sarah to speak before them. She entered the council lodge feeling nervous but determined to represent herself and the children honestly. The lodge was filled with the tribe's leaders, both men and women, their faces serious in the flickering firelight. Nokomis gestured for Sarah to sit in the center of the circle. "Sarah, daughter of my heart," the elder woman said formally. "The council must ask difficult questions. Your answers will help us decide how to protect both you and our people." "I'll answer anything you need to know," Sarah said. Chief Ayana's great-grandfather, an ancient man whose name was Takota, spoke first. His voice was thin with age but carried great authority. "Tell us true, white daughter. Have any among our people harmed you or the little ones?" "No," Sarah said firmly. "Everyone has been kind to us. We've been treated like family." Have you been prevented from leaving if you wish to go? No. Liwanu told me from the beginning that we could leave in the spring if we wanted to. Do you wish to leave now? Sarah hesitated. This was the question that went to the heart of everything. No, she said quietly. This has become our home. These people have become our family. If we leave now, it will only be because we're forced to, not because we want to. An older woman named Ayana spoke next. The soldiers will not understand this. They will see a white girl with white children living among us and assume the worst. Then we must help them understand, Sarah said. Let me speak to them. Let me explain how we came to be here. That could be dangerous, Liwanu warned. Soldiers are not always reasonable men, especially when dealing with tribes. More dangerous than letting them think you kidnapped us? Sarah countered. The council discussed the situation long into the night, sometimes in English for Sarah's benefit and sometimes in their own language when they needed to debate more privately. Sarah sat quietly through it all, trying to project calm confidence while her heart raced with worry. Finally, Chief Dakota raised his hand for silence. We have decided, he announced. The white daughter will remain with us. When the soldiers come, we will meet them openly and honestly. Sarah will speak for herself and the children, and we will speak for ourselves. If they are reasonable men, they will see the truth. If they are not. He didn't finish the sentence, but Sarah could see the steely determination in his eyes. These people had accepted her family as their own, and they would defend them as such. 2 days later, the soldiers arrived. Sarah watched from inside her teepee as a column of blue-uniformed cavalry rode into the village, their horses nervous and their hands resting on their weapons. There were about 20 of them, led by a captain with cold gray eyes and a bristling mustache. The captain dismounted and approached the tribal leaders, who had arranged themselves in a formal receiving line. Sarah could hear his voice clearly, as he spoke in loud, slow English, as if addressing children. I am Captain Morrison of the United States Army. We have reports that you may be holding white captives. I demand that you produce them immediately. Chief Dakota stepped forward, his aged dignity unshaken by the captain's aggressive tone. We hold no captives, he said in careful English, but we do have white guests who came to us freely. Guests? The captain's voice dripped skepticism. Indians don't have white guests. Bring them out now, or we'll search every lodge in this camp. Sarah took a deep breath and pushed aside the teepee flap. She walked out into the open space between the soldiers and the tribal leaders, her head held high despite the fear racing through her veins. I'm Sarah Mitchell, she said clearly. These are my children, Tommy, Mary, and Emma. We're not captives. We're here because this tribe saved our lives. Captain Morrison stared at her in shock. Whatever he had expected to find, it clearly wasn't a confident young woman speaking for herself. Miss, you don't understand your situation. These savages They have fed us when we were hungry, Sarah interrupted, her voice growing stronger. They've given us shelter, protection, and kindness. They've treated us better than most white people ever have. You've been brainwashed, the captain said dismissively. Stockholm Syndrome. It's common in captivity situations. Don't worry, we'll have you back to civilization soon enough. This is civilization, Sarah said firmly. These people care for their children, they're elderly, and they're sick. They share what they have with those who need it. They live in harmony with the land instead of destroying it. What exactly about? That is uncivilized? The captain's face reddened with anger. Now see here, miss. I don't know what lies these Indians have filled your head with, but nobody filled my head with anything, Sarah snapped, her patience finally breaking. I have eyes. I can see how these people live, how they treat each other, how they've treated us. And I can see how you're treating them right now, riding in here with weapons, making demands, calling them savages. Which one of you is behaving in a civilized manner? A murmur ran through both the soldiers and the tribal members. The soldiers looked uncomfortable with their captain's aggressive approach, while the tribal members seemed amazed at Sarah's bold defense of their way of life. Captain Morrison seemed to realize he was losing control of the situation. Miss Mitchell, I'm ordering you to gather your belongings. You and the children will be coming with us immediately. No, Sarah said simply. I beg your pardon? I said no. We're not going anywhere. This is our home now and these are our people. The standoff might have escalated into violence, but at that moment Tommy stepped out from behind one of the teepees. He was dressed in the traditional clothing of a tribal boy, his hair braided with feathers, and he carried a small bow that one of the men had made for him. Sarah's right, he said, his young voice clear and brave. These people are our family now. They take better care of us than anyone ever has. Mary appeared next, holding little Emma's hand. Both girls were also dressed in traditional clothing, and Emma was clutching a beautiful doll that one of the tribal women had made for her. We don't want to go with you, Mary said quietly but firmly. We want to stay here where people love us. The sight of the children, clearly healthy and happy and speaking for themselves, seemed to deflate some of the soldiers' certainty about the situation. Captain Morrison looked around at his men, seeing doubt creeping into their faces. At that moment, Ayanna came running from the direction of the horse herd, having heard about. Captain Morrison stood in the center of the tribal village, surrounded by evidence that challenged everything he thought he knew about Indian-white relations. The confident young woman before him showed no signs of coercion or fear. The children were clearly healthy, happy, and speaking their own minds. The tribal members stood peacefully but protectively around their adopted family, ready to defend them but not threatening violence. One of the soldiers, a young sergeant with kind eyes, stepped forward and spoke quietly to his captain. Sir, with respect, these folks don't look like captives to me. Maybe we should hear the whole story before we make any decisions. Captain Morrison's jaw tightened, but Sarah could see uncertainty in his gray eyes. This wasn't the situation he had expected to find, and his military training hadn't prepared him for dealing with willing guests rather than unwilling prisoners. Very well, he said finally. Miss Mitchell, I'll give you 10 minutes to explain your situation, but I warn you, any attempt to deceive me will be dealt with harshly. Sarah nodded, gathering her thoughts. She knew this might be her only chance to protect the family she had found and the people who had saved them all. Last autumn, I was caring for 3 orphan children in an abandoned cabin, she began, her voice steady and clear. We were starving and freezing and winter was coming. I found Ayanna lost in the forest, hurt and scared. I could have left him there, but he was just a child who needed help. She gestured toward Ayanna, who stood proudly beside his father. I took him back to our cabin, fed him, cared for his wounds, and made him part of our family until his people could find him. When they did, I returned him to his father willingly. That's a touching story, Captain Morrison said skeptically. But it doesn't explain why you're still here. Liwanu and his people saw that we were in desperate condition, Sarah continued. They offered us shelter for the winter, knowing we would die without help. They didn't take us by force, they saved us from certain death. Liwanu stepped forward and spoke to the captain in careful English. My son told the tribal council about this brave girl who shared her food when she had little, who cared for a strange child as if he were her own brother. The elders decided that such kindness deserved kindness in return. You expect me to believe that Indians just invited white strangers to live with them out of the goodness of their hearts? The captain scoffed. Why is that so hard to believe? Sarah asked. Isn't that what good people do? Help others who need help? Before the captain could respond, Nokomis approached the group. The elderly woman walked with dignity despite her age, and even the soldiers seemed to sense her authority and wisdom. Captain, she said in heavily accented but clear English, I am grandmother to many in this tribe. I have lived through many seasons, seen much war and peace between our peoples. I tell you true. This girl and her children came to us in need, and we gave them what we could. This is our way. She gestured toward Sarah and the children. But they have given us much in return. Sarah has cared for our children, taught them new games and stories. Tommy has learned our ways and brought joy to our young men with his eagerness to learn. Mary creates beautiful beadwork that honors our traditions. Little Emma. Nokomi smiled at the youngest child. Little Emma has reminded us all why we protect and cherish the innocent. The captain looked around at the faces surrounding him, tribal members and soldiers alike. Some of his own men were nodding in agreement with the elderly woman's words, clearly moved by what they were witnessing. Furthermore, Nokomis continued, "If you force these children to leave now, in the deep of winter you will be sending them to their deaths. The snows are deep, the cold is bitter, and they have no place to go. Is this the protection your government offers to orphaned children?" This question seemed to hit home with several of the soldiers. The sergeant who had spoken earlier stepped forward again. "Captain, if I may, these children do appear to be well cared for, and the lady has a point about the weather. It would be cruel to force them out in these conditions." Captain Morrison was clearly struggling with a situation that didn't fit into any of the categories his military experience had prepared him for. "Miss Mitchell," he said finally, "are you telling me that you genuinely wish to remain here with these people?" "These people are my family now," Sarah said firmly. "They've shown us more love and acceptance than we ever found in white society. Yes, I genuinely wish to remain here." "And the children? Are they free to speak for themselves?" Tommy stepped forward without hesitation. "I want to stay here, sir. The men are teaching me to be strong and brave. I've never had real fathers before, and now I have many." Mary nodded shyly. "The women are kind to me. They teach me beautiful things and never make me feel like a burden." Little Emma, not to be left out, piped up in her clear voice. "I have lots of grandmas and grandpas here, and they tell the best stories." The captain looked at Ayanna, who had been watching the proceedings with intense interest. "And you, boy? What do you say about all this?" Ayanna stood straighter and spoke with the formal dignity he had learned from watching his elders. "Sarah is my sister. She saved my life when I was lost and afraid. Now my people have saved her life and the lives of her family. This is how it should be. People helping people no matter what they look like." The simple wisdom in the child's words seemed to cut through all the adult complications and prejudices. Several of the soldiers were now openly sympathetic to the family's situation, and even Captain Morrison seemed affected by the boy's earnest statement. "Sir," the kind-eyed sergeant said quietly, "what if we report back that we found no evidence of captivity? Technically, that would be true. These folks are here voluntarily." Captain Morrison stood silent for a long moment, his internal struggle visible on his weathered face. Finally, he sighed heavily. "Miss Mitchell, I'm going to ask you one final time, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Are you here of your own free will? Are the children safe and well cared for? And do you truly wish to remain with this tribe?" "Yes, yes, and yes," Sarah answered without hesitation. The captain nodded slowly. "Very well. I'll report that we found no evidence of white captives in this village. But Miss Mitchell, if you ever change your mind, if you ever need help or rescue, you can send word to the nearest army post." "Thank you, Captain," Sarah said sincerely, "but I don't think that will be necessary." As the soldiers prepared to leave, several of them approached Sarah and the children to wish them well. The kind sergeant shook Sarah's hand warmly. "Miss, I've got to say, you've got more courage than most soldiers I know. Standing up for what you believe in like that takes real strength." After the soldiers had ridden away, the tribal community erupted in celebration. The crisis had passed, and their adopted family was safe. But Chief Dakota raised his hand for attention, indicating that he had something important to say. "The council has been discussing this situation," the elderly chief announced. "We have seen Sarah's courage, her loyalty to our people, and her willingness to stand against those who would harm our community. We have also seen how she has cared for our children and contributed to our tribe's well-being." Sarah felt her heart racing as the chief continued. "It is the decision of the tribal council that Sarah Mitchell should be formally adopted into our tribe, with all the rights and privileges of a full member. If she accepts, she will be given a tribal name and will be considered a daughter of our people forever." The offer was more than Sarah had ever dared to hope for. To be truly accepted, not just as a guest but as a permanent member of the community that had saved her life and the lives of her children. "I accept with great honor," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. The adoption ceremony was held the next morning at dawn, as the first light of the new day painted the snow-covered mountains in shades of pink and gold. The entire tribe gathered in a circle around Sarah, who knelt in the center wearing a beautiful dress that the women had worked all night to create for her. Nokomis stepped forward carrying a small bowl of paint. "From this day forward," the elderly woman announced, "you will be known as Winona, which means firstborn daughter. You came to us first among the white children, and you have shown the wisdom and courage of an elder sister." As Nokomis painted traditional symbols on Sarah's face, each member of the tribe came forward to welcome their new sister. Liwanu placed his hands on her shoulders and spoke in the tribal language, then translated, "I name you daughter of my heart, sister to my son, protector of children, friend to all who need help." Ayana was practically bouncing with excitement as his turn came. "Now you're really my sister," he said in English, then added something in his own language that made the assembled tribe laugh with delight. Tommy, Mary, and Emma were also given tribal names and formally adopted as members of the community. Tommy became Takota, meaning friend to all. Mary was named Ayana, meaning eternal blossom for her beautiful artwork. Little Emma became Winona's little star, a name that suited her bright personality perfectly. As the ceremony concluded, and the tribe began to disperse for their morning activities, Sarah, now Winona, stood watching the sun rise over the mountains that had become her home. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, from a